So I don't know who did the seating arrangements, but I have to now follow this. But definitely excited and humbled to be here on this evening again. Chris McKee with the Mahoning Valley Organizing Collaborative and the Ohio Organizing Collaborative. And as I began to think about what I would say for these couple of minutes, I too wrestled with this language of aspiration and what it means for people to aspire to a certain level of opportunity, not just for themselves, but for their families, for their children, and for generations to come. And when we start to have a conversation about what it means to be middle class, in particular, what it means to be a middle class person of color, we are dealing with a long story of aspiration, of dreams, of visions, of the idea that, like many of us who find their roots in the industrial North, like me, the dreams and aspirations of grandparents and great-grandparents who found good working class labor and found good working class labor as a means to buy homes and provide opportunity for their children, to go on to take levels of life that they could not necessarily reach. What we are encountering at this moment is a time where that dream and that aspiration is slowly dissipating for many people. And it's dissipating around a few key areas, and as an organizer, I can't help but do this. For me, this falls out into issue cuts, or in other words, there are specific issues where we see the large problem of the dismantling of this vision working itself out. One of those areas is in the lack of people's ability to actually build wealth for themselves. And for most folks, that's connected directly to the housing crisis. If people cannot stay in their homes, if people cannot build equity and wealth out of what is typically the first and only primary wealth building tool that most middle class folks have, chances for any type of social movement and upward mobility are dashed. And I think we do have to ask the question on tonight, are our aspirations coming out of places that are driven simply by a self-interested or a selfish story? I think when we have a real racialized analysis around what it means to be middle class, we have to do some truth-telling. We have to do some truth-telling about what middle-class aspirations have meant. And for many people, those aspirations have not been grounded in a selfish pursuit of wealth. I think most of us can say from our own family stories, the stories of our grandparents and great-grandparents are not grounded in a selfish ambition just to build wealth, but it's in an attempt to really figure out how do we navigate this American experience so that folks can have equal opportunity. A second area that we find ourselves in the thick of this fight for opportunity is around education. In particular, in the state of Ohio, we are dealing with an unconstitutional system of funding our schools, our public schools. And the reality is that many of our young people within our urban centers are suffering, not just because those school systems are not producing an adequate educational environment, but the reality is those systems are being solely funded largely in part by the tax bases of those particular communities. And so the question becomes, how can we expect children to have an actual chance at a good education when children who are living in impoverished communities or communities within the urban cores are not given the same level of opportunity as others? A huge piece, and I kind of laughed when I saw the advertisement about being a voter suppression advocate. I don't know if I'm quite that. But we have done our share of work around civic engagement, in particular around educating what we call the rising American electorate. The rising American electorate are those folks who have historically not participated in the democratic project. These are people of color. These are young people. These are people who I can't necessarily say are even middle income. We're really talking about low income to no income, okay? These are people who have not historically engaged in the process of voting. And when we start to talk about voting, it's not just the reality that people need to exercise a right that people bled, died, and suffered for. It's more than that. But it's a real conversation about how do we begin to reweave community fabric in such a way that people are vested in what happens in their neighborhoods, in their cities, in the places where they live. And so a lot of our work has centered around not engaging people around partisan politics. We are nonpartisan, but we are very political. And when I say we are political, that means we are concerned with who gets what and who doesn't get what and why don't they get it, right? And that conversation really comes down to engaging and involving people in the democratic project. So a big piece of this whole conversation around House Bill 194, and I'm sure we'll get to it a bit tonight, is the reality that it is an attempt, much like Issue 2, to try to shrink the number of people participating in the democratic project. Don't be deceived. Funded by corporate interests to ensure that regular people are not participating in the democratic process. That is what House Bill 194 is all about. And so we are really excited that last year we were able to at least put this measure before the people of Ohio this fall for a vote, although there are some people in Columbus attempting to work against that, and their agenda is not one that is grounded in good intentions. Rather, they are trying to slip in additional voting restrictive practices through their policies. One more piece that I want to talk about, because I could go on and on about jobs and the economy, and I could also go on and on about neighborhood stability and safety. But one final piece that I want us to think of as we consider this tie between labor, between class, and between the racialization of class is the fact that there is a rising underclass, in particular in communities of color. And that rising underclass has a lot to do with the criminal justice system or the criminal injustice system. It has a lot to do with the direct pipeline between our communities that are increasingly becoming ghettoized and segregated. The reality is, as we have young people growing up in these dense pockets of concentrated poverty, they are finding themselves being put into a system of class and caste that often has them cycling in and out of the criminal justice system. And so one thing that I want to lift on tonight is how do we begin to think about what it means for people to not even have the aspiration of middle